Good morning. I'm Adam Edelen, the Kentucky State Auditor. In that role, I am charged by the people of Kentucky with evaluating the effectiveness, the efficiency, the honesty, and integrity by which our precious tax dollars are invested by the taxpaying community. Certainly today is a day, I think, of renewal, but an important element of renewal is holding those who created misdeeds in the past accountable for the work that they do. And let me say from the outset that not every function of government is created equal. And it is my view that the responsibility for educating the next generation, for empowering them and making sure that they have the ability to realize the American dream in the communities they came up in is, to me, the most fundamental obligation of government, which accordingly makes our schools, in my view, the most important function of our government at any level. And anytime that you have abuses that occur that rob young people of their hopes and their dreams, we've got a big problem, not just as a taxpayer community, but as a community who believes that we owe a moral obligation to every child to help them have the resources they need to be able to compete in the global economy. I want to congratulate and express my appreciation to the current superintendent. Mr. Brewer is the reason why we are here today. It was the important work that he did in determining that there were discrepancies that needed to be addressed that brought my own office in. And I think it's an important element of leadership to acknowledge mistakes that have been made in the past and develop a game plan for improving them. And certainly the superintendent and his board deserve real credit for the great work that they're trying to do on behalf of these precious school children here in the Dayton School District. I want to say also at the outset that my tenure in office has been one that's been marked by a series of aggressive investigations on behalf of the public. I want to be clear that while this may not be the biggest amount of abuse that we have ever uncovered as your state auditor, it's the one that's most personally offensive to me. To have a person to be entrusted with the administration of a school district, enrich himself at the expense of the children he's entrusted to educate, is something that strikes me to my core, and I know it's something that's going to offend every Kentuckian. And we're not just talking about kids, we're talking about great kids who represent the whole of our potential as a state. And the fact that 90% of them are eligible for free and reduced lunch only adds insult to injury. The former superintendent received $224,000 in benefits and payments over 8 years that were not authorized by the board. Folks, that's $240 per kid. And a lot of times when we talk about waste and fraud and abuse in my business, it becomes about numbers that are on a board. But folks, I'm here to tell you this is about the lives of children who rely on us to make sure that they have a quality education. $240 per child. That's something that we can't tolerate, and indeed it's something that we can't stomach. When people want to know what kind of what corruption, the cost of corruption, the cost of abuse of office means, to these kids it didn't just mean $240 a head. What it meant is lost opportunity. And here's what I need you to understand about education. When we miss an opportunity to educate a child in any given year, it is an opportunity that cannot be regained. When we fail to make investments in young people, when we enrich ourselves at their expense, we cheat those children of those opportunities that they've got to have. As you look at the list here, the questionable payments made to the former superintendent, $103,000 in personal retirement contributions, not allotted by the board. Retirement service credit purchase of more than $42,000. Duplicate mileage of almost $3,000. And mileage for unattended or non-existent meetings. This is unbelievable. You want to see evidence of fraud. What you see here is absolute deception. These were reimbursements for work that he did not do. 62 unauthorized leave days, 40 and a half sick and 7 annual days not deducted. It also adds significantly to this. And then the unauthorized use of his gas card and travel expenses that were not incurred brings this to almost $224,000. $224,000 that this superintendent enriched himself, that he subsidized his own lifestyle, all the while cutting programs that our children rely on in this very same school district. We have 12 findings related to the payments and benefits to the former superintendent as related to credit card expenditures and board oversight. The superintendent intimidated staff members responsible for issuing checks if they questioned him. Folks, you cannot police power when you're subservient to those that, who have the power. The administration here never had a chance in terms of providing meaningful oversight for someone who was committed to enriching himself at the public expense. The biggest chunk of the money was $146,000 for his personal retirement contributions and service credit purchases. I want to point out again, this wasn't authorized by the board. What you have here is a culture of deception, and the board and the students who are entrusted to serve were the victims. He was paid another $47,000 for sick leave and annual leave, either not approved by the board or taken but not deducted from the leave balance. There was rampant abuses while he restricted athletics teams' ability to travel. Folks, this is unconscionable. To be enriching yourself at the expense of kids who need it, at the same time rejecting the ability of the kids' athletic teams to be able to travel to tournaments. It's absolutely unconscionable. But while the kids weren't able to travel, he was traveling a great deal. $21,000 in fuel purchases on a district credit card for his personal use. Again, not authorized by the board. He double and even triple dip. Now, folks, that's really something. It takes some effort to triple dip. Using district credit cards to pay for gas and expenses, submitted mileage, and even ripped off the Kentucky Association of School Administrators for travel expenses when he was chair. $8,500 in expenses that he didn't incur but were duplicated or for non-existent meetings. The board didn't consistently perform his evaluations, and they continued to extend the contract without properly reviewing it. And it's difficult to hold someone who is so committed to deception accountable. But in the future, we've got to make sure that this board, as I know it is committed to providing the proper level of oversight for the superintendent trusted with administering the district. This report has been referred to the FBI, the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, the Department of Revenue, and the Kentucky State Committee for School District Audits. The fact that we have made an unprecedented step of referring this formally to the Federal Bureau of Investigation demonstrates just how offensive these acts in office were and how greatly they cry out for accountability. The district has been cooperative with my office, and it hopes to recuperate the money. Now let me say this. The leadership we have at this school district and this board today has been exemplary in the degree to which they've cooperated with my office. It says a lot about the leadership of this community, and it says a lot about the leadership of this school, that they're willing to face the music, do the right thing, and make my job of investigating far easier. And again, Jay, that's a real credit to your leadership and the leadership that the school district currently enjoys. This exam was the fourth into schools that my office has conducted since last fall. We found abuses in Kenton County, Breathitt, and Mason counties. And I want you to know that as long as I'm in public life, I will continue to be the taxpayer watchdog focusing on our most important area of public investment, our schools. Folks, running a school is an important, sacred obligation, but it's one in which you basically have two responsibilities. The first responsibility is to the children we're in charge of educating. The second is to the taxpayers who pay the freight. And what we've got in this instance was a dramatic failure of meeting the obligation to both our kids and our taxpayers. We've got to fix that. We've got to make sure that the lesson of Dayton, the new spirit of cooperation and leadership that you've got in the Dayton School District is a demonstration to the rest of the state that we know that our central offices exist to drive excellence in the classroom. The kids don't exist to support the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy exists to support them. That's a message that I'm hopeful will be heard all across Kentucky. We continue to receive concerns and are evaluating our next assignment, but make no mistake, I will be in this field as long as I'm the public taxpayer watchdog. Making sure spending in our public schools is geared toward supporting students is my #1 priority. I will be making additional announcements in the coming weeks and months about my plans to make sure there is adequate accountability and transparency in all 174 school districts. The question is asked, what's the ultimate solution to these problems? And I would tell you that it is leadership. Commissioner Holliday announced last week he plans to require additional training for boards and a consistent superintendent evaluation process. I'm working closely with the Commissioner to address some of the common themes that have emerged as the result of my examinations. In addition, my office is working with district officials and boards to address questions they have about the process that should be in place. My experience is that the far overwhelming majority of people who are involved in our schools are people who precisely want to do the right thing, who are motivated by a commitment to the next generation. What we don't deserve in Kentucky is to have their good work besmirched by the bad acts of a few bad apples. So I'm in the business of removing the bad apples from the barrel and letting the people who are doing quality work, who aren't letting our kids down, who are laboring every day to do the right thing, to give them the power they need to meet the commitment that we have to our young people and our taxpayers. But it is difficult not to conclude that there are some recurring themes that have been the result of the investigations that we have so far conducted. We've got to make sure there is a proper level of oversight from the board. In almost any area of endeavor, when I'm able to find big problems, it's because there's not an appropriate balance between the board and the executive. And the best examples of getting it right, not just in education, but in any area of endeavor, is when you have a proper level of balance between the administrator and the board that oversees the administrator. In some places we've seen in Kentucky where the board has too much power and the administrator becomes a rubber stamp. And others we've seen where the administrator takes advantage of a board. What we have to do in Kentucky is make sure that we keep and are able to maintain that critical balance, because the quality of our school administration hangs in the balance. A lack of transparency and disclosure to the public and to the boards. You know, I'm often asked, what's the difference between Dayton and the major audit that we conducted in Mason County? The difference is, in Mason County, the board was largely complicit to the bad acts of that superintendent. What we have here is that we have a board that was largely a victim of the deception by the former superintendent. We've got to make sure that the relationship between the board and the administrator is proper. And we've got to make sure at the end of the day that everybody involved with our schools it keeps in mind our primary obligations to the children we're in charge of educating and to the taxpayers who entrust us with the investment that they make in this very important endeavor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm open for questions.
You described a culture of deception and said that the former superintendent was committed to deception. How did this not get caught by Dayton School's own auditors? I mean, I have to assume that they have their own auditor that comes in and looks at this.
Certainly.
How did they not find this $200,000 and some odd thousand that was unauthorized?
It's a very good question. And today the focus of the investigation is on holding the former superintendent to account for his misdeeds. But as part of that, I want to make clear, an audit is not in and of itself an oversight. It is not in and of itself the only mechanism we have for oversight. An audit is a management tool, and it can't take the place of proper management oversight. And I think we've got to make sure that we communicate to every school board in Kentucky, not just this one, but every school board in Kentucky, that just the act of having an audit performed doesn't absolve you of your oversight obligations.
Did you all look into any of his initial applications to the board and any accuracies there, or were you solely focused on the numbers here?
We were solely focused on giving the new superintendent a clean slate by which to do his job. It is not fair to bring in new leadership. It is not fair to bring in new leadership without a game plan for providing a solution to a broken culture. And that's very much what we had as represented by the former superintendent. So my focus is on making sure that Jay Brewer has got a plan and a catalyst for action to produce for the kids in Dayton the school district that they deserve. That was our primary obligation. Our second obligation was to make sure that we held the former superintendent accountable for his significant misdeeds. And we've done that, and I'm sure now that this school board that has been very impressive to me in their commitment to fixing the sins of the past will spend a lot of time with this, and there'll be a lot of soul searching, and I think there's going to be a lot of looking back at things like you mentioned, like the applications and perhaps what the superintendent may have done previous to coming here.
But your office didn't specifically?
It wasn't my function.
Now, he's obviously not living here now. Is he aware of the findings of your investigation?
Oh, I'm sure he's aware, and I think there's a very good reason that he's not living here right now.
Did he cooperate at all? Or
No, sir.
Was he approached?
We afford, I want to be crystal clear about this, and if this doesn't outrage each and every one of you, it ought to. We afford every target of an investigation the opportunity to due process, the opportunity to tell their side of the story. This superintendent, this former superintendent, declined repeated offers to tell his side of the story. And I can only discern that he declined those opportunities because the facts that emerge in this report are indefensible. But he never exercised any opportunity to explain or describe, and I think that is I think that's a character-revealing moment.
The audit lays out 55 recommendations. Can you talk briefly about some of those recommendations?
Well, recommendations such as making sure that we have better board policies in place, that there are more accountability and transparency in terms of determining precisely what a superintendent is owed as part of their compensatory package, making sure that you have the controls in place so that this never happens again.
And I've scanned your press release here. I don't see this person's name listed here. Can you share that with us?
Certainly.
Right.
We have, let me explain why. We have a policy in the auditor's office that long predates my administration that we redact names. This is an investigation. These are the findings of the investigation, but we're not in the business of being the judge, jury, and execution. I'm merely the investigator. So we have a practice of not revealing the names, but the former superintendent's name is Gary Rye.
You contacted, as you said, the FBI. What was it that you saw here that made you go to the federal authorities rather than the Commonwealth's attorney here in Campbell County?
This is a serious breach, in my view, of the Hobbs Act, which means that any abuse of public office for personal gain is a federal crime. And I have actively and aggressively pursued a partnership with the Bureau in the year that I've been in office. Matter of fact, I'm pleased to report that I now have 2 FBI agents who are essentially embedded in the daily operation of the auditor's office. Because I think what we have to make sure of is that not on my watch am I going to permit this to happen. In the past, lots of good work has been done only to be ignored. And I have a zero tolerance policy for the very good work of my professional staff being ignored. And I want to acknowledge the excellent work that my staff has done in preparing this very powerful document, led by Brian Likens, who is essentially my lead special investigator. He did extraordinary work. There are a number of other people who worked on it. But I have no tolerance for public corruption. And I have no tolerance for the findings of my reports being ignored, which speaks to our new and profound relationship we have with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
I understand his deception toward everybody, but is the Board of Education completely free of blame? And did you see places where, as you went through this audit, that they should have followed?
This isn't about assigning blame. This is about identifying weaknesses and shortcomings in the institution and the culture. And certainly, we've got to produce, not just in Dayton, but in every school board in Kentucky, a more aggressive level of oversight. I mean, this isn't, I want you to be clear that this isn't a Dayton problem. This is a statewide problem. And this is just one of the most egregious examples, certainly the most personally offensive example of abuse of office in my tenure as auditor. And it probably offends me so deeply because I have twin 7-year-old boys. And I know how precious every child is. And in public life, when we aspire to make sure that every kid can make it, you got to have an education. And the notion that you're stealing from any kid, much less poor kids, is deeply offensive to me. And certainly, we all know that there are things that we could have done better, and hindsight is always 20/20. But the important thing to do for these kids is to build the kind of culture here that provides for them and prevents this kind of abuse from ever happening.
But outside of the former superintendent, you found no one else complicit in any of
No, I mean, it largely appeared to be, and this happens in small districts, and I think you can get a cult of personality can develop. And I think one thing we've got to recenter anybody who works for a school district anywhere in Kentucky is that your your loyalty can't be to the man, it's got to be to the mission. And making sure that we bring that kind of culture, which is standard in the business community, to all layers of government, I think is extraordinarily important.
Dr. Rye was the superintendent here, as I recall, for 15 years, but the scope of your audit does not cover all 15 years, does it not?
It does not.
What does it cover, and why did you not go back further?
We were able to go back. My office doesn't make haphazard assumptions, and we make sure that every finding we've got, particularly the more than 50 that are in here, are airtight, that they're absolutely nailed. And what we were comfortable with making an evaluation over an 8-year period relates to his most recent contract. And that's why we didn't go back substantially further. Things age, memories fade, documents get lost, but making sure that we can hold him account for his misdeeds in office was something that we were able to do with this report, and its focus has been the last several years.
Do you believe, had you been able to go back further, that number would be higher?
I can't speak to that. I'm just not in the business, and I hope you understand that. I'm not in the business of making any evaluation that isn't grounded in 100% reality. We auditor's office know we have to have everything nailed. So I think it's safe to assume, if we look back further, given the culture, there may have been other abuses, but I can't speak to that directly.
Does that do justice if we get that money back for the students of Dayton?
Let me be clear. I want the money back for these kids. Let me say this one more time. I want the money back for the kids in Dayton. The superintendent wants the money back. This board wants the money back. And we need to do everything we can together to make sure these kids get what's due them.
You said that the school board was the victim of this administrator, and that it's important to keep some type of balance between the administration and the elected board. How? How does that balance come about?
Oh, it's standard. I mean, it's not difficult to get to. It means making sure that you have the proper procedures and controls in place, making sure that you have policies that guarantee evaluation, to make sure that you have an annual process and system in place for not only evaluating the superintendent's performance, but also evaluating his financial stewardship of the organization. I mean, look, there's no question that this superintendent did a lot of things he ought not to have done. And certainly, in a perfect world, the board would have been able to call him on this. But when you have an absence of those policies and procedures, when you have someone who is committed, in my view, to larceny, and is willing to deceive the board or hide things in highly detailed places, it's very difficult to have that kind of oversight. But I want to point out, the school board as a whole is a victim, but the real victim here are the 1,000 kids who are trusted with the education of this district. And I want to be clear about that.
Can you talk a little more about how he treated his employees?
You had not only a culture of deceit, but you had a culture of entitlement, and you had a culture of retribution. It was one through our interviews that it was pretty clear that rank and file staff here were frightened to do the right thing. It was a culture in which you could be punished for doing the right thing. And that kind of retribution is just something I don't cotton to. And we've got to make sure that that kind of abuse of power doesn't happen again.
What would you say to other school employees or other employees in the public sector who feel like they are in a situation where they have a similar culture? Is that a warning sign?
It is a warning sign, and that's a great question, because what I would say to anybody in public service, particularly those in schools, your ultimate loyalty has to be to your mission, which is serving the public. It cannot be loyalty to your boss or a political power structure. You can't be loyal to both. And the way that we get there is to make sure people understand that their obligation is to the people they serve. And what I would encourage other school administrators who may be being bullied, I would absolutely encourage them to communicate to the board. Certainly, the board has the authority to act, and it's my view, and you talk about one of the structures that need to be in place. I think The finance officer of school districts need to understand that to me, they ought to report to the board. And that finance officers or people who handle the money ought to know that their employment isn't based on the whims of their boss.
How does the district begin to get this money back, and what are the chances?
I think that's a question for the superintendent. I think there's clearly a case of fraud here. And in my view, there's a clear demonstration that more than $200,000 this superintendent was able to enrich himself beyond what his contract allowed. So I would submit to you that this nearly $250,000 isn't his money. It belongs to the kids who go to these schools. And I think, you know, I'm an optimist. I believe in the rightness of people, and I believe that if this goes to the courts, that the judges and people who may be impaneled to make a decision about this will do the right thing. All right, folks. Jay, do you want to say anything? Actually, you just come over here.
Briefly. First of all, I want to thank Adam and Brian and Jim and Julie for all their great work. I also want to thank the Board of Education for nothing but 100% support through this when we started to uncover these things. And I also want to recognize our office staff, our assistant superintendent, Patty Patterson. Since the get-go of these findings, our intention has been to do the right thing for kids. And that's what we're going to be doing here. I also want to thank our board attorney, Matthew DeMarcus, and he may be able to address the question about where we're going and moving forward in that area. So again, I want to thank Adam and his staff. They're doing the right thing for kids, and that's what we're going to continue to do. So Matt could probably address specifically our next steps and what we're going to do. So I'll yield the floor to him.
Thank you, Superintendent Brewer. To answer that question, there's at least a threefold method to pursue the funds. One is to pursue a claim directly against the former superintendent, which we certainly intend to do. The other is to pursue a claim against the independent auditor who was mentioned earlier under their professional negligence in this case. And we will also the third is to pursue claims against the insurance companies who have insured this board against employee theft. And we will be, the one thing I can tell you is the board has been very clear from the outset of this in directing me as the board attorney to aggressively pursue every single penny that was received by the former superintendent without authorization of the board, and that will be done.
Now, you said all the things are things you could do. You are doing all of those things, correct?
Correct. We're in the process of doing them right now.
And are you looking into a further investigation like we spoke of these application materials and that sort of thing? Well, the monies that we are seeking to recoup are not limited to the 8 years that the auditor's office has provided the report of the examination on. We will be seeking the monies of any monies that were received by the former superintendent that was not authorized by the board. We will seek recoupment of those monies from the day that the former superintendent stepped into the district until the day he left.
Do you have any idea of what that dollar figure may be?
Don't speculate.
We
Thanks. Sorry, I'm not going to let you do that. Yeah.
Do you have a figure without speculating? I mean, do you have a?
We do not have a figure. We're starting with the baseline of what the auditor's office provided for us, and we appreciate the work of the auditor's office. I know they've worked tirelessly on this report, and we will start with that as a baseline, and then seek anything additional to that may exist. But thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Yeah, Jack.
I have a comment, Adam, on behalf of the folks who care about the school district. We need to thank Jay Brewer for his efforts.
That's right.
Being a new superintendent was damn hard. Being a new superintendent and having to deal with this kind of thing is almost impossible. He needs to get back to the business.
Educating kids.
And we need to thank you. I've heard auditors over the years, in the 40 years that I've followed state government, make noise about being the watchdog, but you're really doing it, and that's important for us.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I just hope I don't get shot. Thank you all very much.